welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Free Expression Friday series, an interview series from ABA's American Booksellers for Free Expression, celebrating the amazing work of booksellers, organizers, and book people in general, fighting for the right to read.
Hi, it's Philomena from ABFI. In lieu of This Week in Book Challenges this week, I wanted to give you some updates from our case in Arkansas, as well as helping you navigate the dizzying array of executive actions that we've seen since January 20th. First, Arkansas. Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin has appealed District Judge Timothy Brooks' decision granting a final injunction against Arkansas Act 372, a case in which ABA is a plaintiff. Now, turning to a federal level. It's been a dizzying week of executive orders and pronouncements from the new administration, some of which have free expression implications. Yet, it can be hard to tell what matters and what doesn't, especially with executive orders, which have a complicated legal status. Here is a take from American Booksellers for Free Expression on what you can ignore and what you should probably pay attention to. Here's what you can ignore. 1, the idea, released in an executive order last week, that book bans are a hoax. The administration does not control reality, and parents and students across the country know what is happening in their communities. This one is more of an insult than an injury, though, so we recommend just let it roll off. Also, claims that the administration has, quote, restored freedom of speech and ended federal censorship, unquote. This is a clear falsehood in the context of recent other executive orders that at once compel and restrict speech on issues of gender and belief. So, if those are the two that we're telling you to ignore, here's what we recommend you pay attention to instead. 1. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights dismissed 11 book ban investigations that were previously ongoing. While the fact-finding process and the possibility of creating more affirming school environments was valuable, however, the scope of these cases and their possible remediation was limited. So this matters, but it's not the end of the world, and the fight goes on. 2. State legislation is increasingly where the fates of books and book bans are being determined. You can sign up for our voter voice updates on bookweb.org/advocacy to receive an email when it is time to act in your state. And finally, here's one last thing that you should probably pay attention to. The viewpoint-based threats to funding that could use financial coercion through the conditional withholding of federal funds to dictate speech to public entities and the private citizens and institutions who contract with them. The administration is brazenly attempting to punish anyone whose speech or belief it disagrees with. So, that's our update for this week. And now I'm going to talk to Laney Hawes, one of the founders of the Texas Freedom to Read project and a Texas parent herself. And I'll make reference in this conversation to a coalition letter that the Texas Freedom to Read project has put together, and they are looking especially for signatories in Texas. So if you're in Texas and you're listening to this, go to Texas Freedom to Read project's website and look for their sign-on letter. All right, so without further ado, my conversation with Laney Hawes from the Texas Freedom to Read project. Laney Hawes from the Texas Freedom to Read project. Laney, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, from down here in the heart of Texas.
Yeah, and the heart of a bit of chaos right now, especially where books and schools and libraries are concerned. How are you all holding up?
Because I'm an optimist, I will say that, things are good. I like to look forward with hope to the future, but I'm a realist. And so it's been discouraging and frustrating. But we're here, we're fighting, and we are ready for this Texas legislative session.
Yeah, and the Texas legislative sessions, they work a little bit differently than might be the case in some states. Can you just say a little bit about what's different about Texas and how that translates into how these legislative sessions actually work on the ground and what's prioritized?
Right. So in Texas, we only have a legislative session every other year, which is different from most states. And it runs from January to June, I believe. And so last year we didn't have a legislative session. And sometimes those years feel a little bit like a breather, a break, even though there are things still going on. Although it is wild to me that it's starting back up, because it did feel like just yesterday we had the first session. But yeah, so we're about to start a session, but everything for 2 full years worth of whatever's happened has to be shoved into ultimately 5 months, 6 months of material. And so here we are. It was kicked off a few weeks ago. A lot of bills have been introduced. We thought we had a handle on it. We were looking at the bills. There were some bills that were really concerning to us. And then it seems like every time we turn on our bill tracker, new bills have been introduced that are seemingly more and more terrifying or frustrating or devastating for educators, for librarians, and for the freedom to read, and also for public education in general. We can't really talk about this conversation without really wrapping up that they're all connected, right? So the public education movement and this book banning, it's all together, partially because what we've learned here in Texas, and we've seen it across the rest of the country, is they actually use the fear behind this book banning movement to build distrust in public education, right? Because the end goal is privatization, is private schools paid for with government money, where they can ban all the books and all the curriculum they want, right? Because these private schools aren't held to the same, we call it TEKS in Texas, which is the Texas Education Standards. And so, yeah, book banning, it isn't just about the books. It's about controlling what our children have access to. And this book banning movement has instilled so much fear and hysteria in the community that people are starting to question if public education is even worth it. Even those who are against book banning, right, or censorship, or whatever we want to call it, are so exhausted from the fighting and the defunding of public education, and that even they're thinking, well, could I just go find my child a progressive private school, right, where I don't, right? And that is really concerning to us here in Texas, because we believe that public education has the potential to be the great equalizer, right? Because there are families that even with a voucher cannot afford private school, or can't get to one, right? We look at rural Texas, they don't have private schools in these teeny tiny towns, but when they defund public ed, and that is going to mean that kids all across Texas are losing access to the education, the information, the ideas, the books, the literature, the biology, right? Everything that they need to go out and navigate the world and have fulfilling, successful lives. So it's all wrapped up. And as a mom to 4 kids at Texas public schools, it's discouraging. But because I feel so strongly about protecting my children's access to these materials and to the other kids in my community, it also fuels my fire, right? So that was a big answer. But that's kind of how the Texas legislative session works. Every other year, we just see what's coming, and it's getting worse as everything is becoming hyper-politicized, and as the far-right movement, which really doesn't even look anything like the Republican Party anymore, right? Like, the far-right movement has gained a lot more control. And the bills that they're pushing forward are astounding and horrifying and terrifying. And it doesn't even look like conservatism anymore. It's actually like wrapped so far around that it's outrageous government overreach and hyper control of people's lives, their bedrooms, their classrooms, their stores, right? We've got, and so it's not even about, anyway, but it's frustrating, but here we are.
And so in terms of some of the bills that you're watching, there's so many to keep track of. And I assume that's part of the strategy, right? Just kind of throw everything out there, and then something is going to run out of the pack before anyone can catch it. At least that's the goal.
Yeah.
Are there any bills that target books specifically, and any free expression bills that you're especially concerned about, both in terms of the impact that they would have and your sense of what kind of likelihood they have of succeeding?
I would say here at Texas Freedom to Read, our greatest concern, and I don't think we were quite ready for this to be at the magnitude it is. There are so many potential bills right now, right? It's all introduced legislation and talk because they haven't come out of committee. There are so many bills that criminalize educators librarians. And what's wild is these bills go a step further. They will criminalize potentially therapists. They could criminalize a person who, okay, so you say you want a little free library and you put it in your front yard. If a child gets a book out of that someone deems, what with their rubrics, that it is explicit, the homeowner, whoever built the little free library, could now be charged with it, right? We're criminalizing, and we thought there would be one or two, but every time we log in online, I mean, I could talk to you about all of them. I could read them off: HB 267, HB 947, HB 995, HB 1012, let's see, HB 1434, SB 89, SB 2. These are all relating to the affirmative defense for prosecution, involving materials or conduct that are obscene or otherwise harmful to children. And I think this might be the plan, is to terrify everyone that you're going to go to jail if you have a copy of The Glass Castle that you allow someone to read. I mean, I can't even fathom what it could mean potentially for some healthcare workers when we're talking about things as basic as sex education, right? It's about control. It is about limiting. What's so funny about all of it, and I have to laugh every single time, is the internet exists.
Well, for now, I mean, I don't mean to be glib. No, I don't mean to be glib, but, there are so many bills that are trying to create age verification with these really broad standards that could impact books and could impact all these other things.
The funny thing is about all of these age verifications is there anyone more devious than a teenager trying to get themselves into I listen, at my kids' school, they're not supposed to be able to access YouTube on all of their devices. And my son comes home the other day, he's like, Mom, I just put this VPN app on my computer and I can still access YouTube. And I'm just like, okay, well, don't tell me that, because now, so what, but you're right. Another thing I want to point out, and I'm sorry, this is kind of book related, but it has to do with children. And that's what we're talking about. Is that the worst place any children can learn about some of the topics that we are, like sex or drugs or things like that we're trying to hide, is through the rumor mill on the school bus and in the bathroom. That is not actually a healthy way. They are going to get the most horrific information, and it's not probably going to be accurate, and it might be even against their will. And our children benefit from having access to educational materials or books that are a safe space where they get to put that down if they don't want to read it, right? Or they can choose not to read it. And they get to read books. And I always bring up the book Poet X because it was banned in my children's school district. And after it was banned, I read it and I was so touched by it. This book talks about consent in the most real way for teenagers. It's not even that sexually explicit. It's about a girl who doesn't want to go, any further, and her boyfriend, and the respect in that. And it talks about all these other things, and so much power in our children being able to read about things like that in meaningful stories, so that they protect them. They protect themselves. And when I look at what has happening at the state legislature and through the book banning, the censorship movement in Texas, is we are taking away our children's access to things that were actually keeping them safer. Right? Books weren't turning kids gay. Books weren't turning kids into sexual beings. Books were enriching their lives and helping them navigate those difficult issues that they're actually facing in real life. We're back to the Texas legislature. We are most concerned, probably right now, just because they keep popping up, is these criminalization bills, because the chilling effect, it doesn't look like book banning, but it is, right? Because it will terrify people so badly that they won't even want to read the book themselves. I mean, what happens if I have a book at home that I want to read and my child picks it up and reads it? You know what I mean? I don't. Could a parent be charged and criminalized because their child? I don't know, and I don't. Let's be honest. The people writing the laws don't know either. Because the intent of these laws is not well thought through. It's not actually about protecting children. It's about political posturing and making statements and trying to control people. And I don't know if I've talked to you about this before, but there is a lesson I have learned in reading state legislation in Texas. If you read a bill and you think, gosh, this doesn't make sense. How would this work? Or how would you apply this? Or would this apply to this? And you think to yourself, well, they must have thought that through, right? It must be later in the bill. It must make sense. The answer is no. No, it must not. And if I read something that doesn't make any sense, it's because it doesn't. And they didn't think that through, because it didn't matter, because this is about posturing. And so we can't even fathom the ramifications of some of these bills and the unintended consequences of some of these bills. It's going to affect stores like bookstores.
Yeah.
If this is the law, I mean, what is a bookseller going to do if they want to carry a copy of The Bluest Eye on their bookshelf?
Yeah.
They also have children's books in there. So we don't know. No one knows.
Yeah, and you're so right. And you're so right to point to the ways that all of these bills that are targeting books are part of the same mission, and they're coming at it from different angles. They're putting different pieces together that are meant to work in concert. And I want to drill down into a few that especially caught my eye, and feel free to take us to some others that caught your eye. SB 88 / I think HB 1012, I think they might be the same. But SB 88, we'll refer to it as for now. This is one that if you're looking at it, if you're just looking at the bill text, it might seem kind of innocuous, but actually it's very minor changes that make a huge difference. And what it does is it takes out of the harmful to minors provision the language, the work taken as a whole, and it removes the word utterly from that it is utterly without redeeming social value for minors. So can you talk a little bit about what impact that could have, these seemingly minor changes?
This is not seemingly minor. This changes everything. So they're defining harmful materials as harmful material means material that, they're changing it to material that appeals to the prurient interest of a minor is sex, nudity, or excretion. And they're replacing it was harmful material means material whose dominant theme taken as a whole appeals to, or is patently offensive, and it goes on and on. This means that one word in a whole book could make it considered harmful material. It could criminalize it, right? So I'm going to give you a little example to help you understand why this is so important. In our work here in Texas, as Texas Freedom to Read Project, we have one really big piece of advice for school districts and libraries when they're evaluating books. We acknowledge that there should be a book challenge process in place in libraries and in schools. We're okay that if someone has a concern with a book, they can share that concern. But there's a really big piece that we defend and will stand for and advocate for, and that is that when books are evaluated through these processes, that they be evaluated as a whole, and that you cannot take a passage out of context. And the reason that is because if you look at a book like The Kite Runner, right? A lot of people know about the book The Kite Runner. It's this story and I think about the Taliban in the Middle East, and it is a powerful and moving story. It is hundreds of pages long. And within the pages of that book is a description of a sexual assault, right? That book is not pornography. It's simply not, right? It talks about something horrific that happened. Now, that book may not be appropriate for every child at every age to read. In fact, it's probably only appropriate for older kids, and even then they may not want to, right? A 17, a 16, an 18-year-old. But even then, every kid's different. It's a difficult read for a lot of adults. But it's not pornography. And it's not a book that, when you say a sexually explicit book, you're thinking 50 Shades of Grey, right? That's not what these books are. And when you evaluate a book as a whole, you recognize that. And you realize how much redeeming social value there can be, and it could change someone's life. It could save their life, right? And so this law would say that book, because it has, one scene in it of the hundreds of pages, it is now considered harmful material to minors. Now, when we say minors too, we have to remember, that book is not appropriate for a first grader. We all agree. But a 17-year-old, it could be a book that they want to read, and that may not be harmful to them. And so to remove the clause, whose dominant theme taken as a whole, is devastating.
Yeah.
We're going to take away the books like The Glass Castle. Now, interestingly, this feels like the Bible would really be gone, right? Because so many people like, we often bring that up to discuss it because we need to recognize that you can't take things out of context. I am not opposed to the Bible being in libraries, right?
Of course not.
But there is sexual material in the Bible, right? It talks about concubines. We could go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not looking at the Bible as a whole and saying, hey, this is actually a religious text, on and on, it does have redeeming value, then that book has to go as well. So are we going to have every pastor in Texas now be charged with a crime if they share the Bible with children? Because you can't selectively, I mean, hold on a second. They will selectively apply the law.
Of course.
But you can't. But they will, because the law is only as good as those who interpret it and apply it, right?
Yeah.
But that's how absurd it is. So yeah, that is, I mean, we've also found in all of our research at Texas Freedom to Read Project, when books are evaluated as a whole by members of the community who read the books in their entirety, books that are challenged, 9 times out of 10, those books go back on library shelves.
Yeah.
Because when push comes to shove, even some of the most conservative individuals who are afraid of a book to begin with, once they read the whole thing, they're like, oh, this isn't pornography.
Yeah.
This might be a mature theme, but this isn't harmful.
Gee, Laney, it's almost like the librarians who put them there in the first place knew what they were doing.
Almost. So yeah, no, I can't even express how devastating it is for us to see this line be taken out. I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to fight to protect it, right?
Yeah. And, so that's one law, really, and I don't want to scare anyone here, but I think even if you're listening to this and you're not in Texas, this is something that could potentially lead to new precedent being set at the highest levels.
So that's I'm glad you brought that up, Philomena. That's another point, is that these individuals at our state legislature are likely being directed by bigger players who want to push these laws through so that they can be challenged and taken to the Supreme Court. And they believe they have a friendly Supreme Court, which will then rule and rewrite the precedent that exists and ultimately rewrite the First Amendment, right? And the Constitution.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of these bills are actually about pushing them their way to the Supreme Court. In fact, some of them are written in a way that is so provocative that they're almost like provoking us to challenge them, right?
Yeah.
And so we also have to look at them carefully that way and ask ourselves, that is the truth of it, right?
Yeah. And the best way to protect against it, easier said than done, is to stop them from passing in the first place. So we're, you're mobilizing, we're mobilizing, everyone's mobilizing.
Well, and also even before that, to stop electing people who are
right.
like, on the payroll and taking their direction from a very, very strong far right movement in this country. That I, like I said, I'm not even going to call it Republicanism anymore, or it doesn't matter. The politics of it doesn't matter because it's not about that. It's a very narrow movement that is pushing to control and suppress.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
right?
So one other bill I want to touch on, because it mirrors, I think, what we've seen happening in Utah and South Carolina. It's HB 183, which is basically the Texas Board of Education saying, hey, we want in on this statewide book ban stuff.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about that.
Please.
So one thing that we found is that those in our state who are really pushing this movement, they're really angry that there are still communities across the state of Texas that don't want to ban books, right? And they're like, wait a second, we want you to ban these books. And they're getting a little pushback. And they're not even getting pushback in just the more progressive or whatever areas. They're getting pushback in places they're being surprised by, where communities are saying, hey, we can make these decisions for ourselves. We trust our community. And turns out that those who are pulling the strings aren't happy about that. And they've decided, you know what, we need to be able to ban these books statewide. And so there is a bill. We may even see more, the different variations that would ultimately say, if you have a book in your children's schools that you don't like and you want to challenge, instead of challenging it at the district level, why don't you come challenge it here at the State Board of Education? And then we will decide. And we will then decide what to do with that book for the whole state rather than just your school district. And that just empowers this handful of 3 or 4 individuals who we know are already traveling the state. And this means they just get to stay in Austin to do it, right? It gives them ultimately a free pass. Again, another devastating and ridiculous bill. And again, another example of the fact that this is about government overreach and control. This is micromanaging the people to the ultimate extent. This is not liberty. This is not freedom. This is government control in every decision of our lives. And this is a piece of it. Now they're going to decide what we can read and what we can get in our bookstores and our libraries. And they're going to, okay, sure. Yeah. We hate big government, but we're going to tell you what you can read and what you can, what you can do in your own bedroom and what you can buy at the store. It's an attack on liberty. It really is.
It is. And so Texas Freedom to Read Project is doing such incredible work. Can you say a little bit about how people can support you right now in this fight?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a local Texan, we actually want you and your thoughts and your voice and your warm body. So if you're a Texan, find us online and sign up to volunteer. We will need people sending, emails to their legislators. We need people to go to Austin to testify. We need people to rally up support in their communities for the freedom to read. So yeah, if you're a local Texan, just call us. Find us on social media, DM us, whatever you need. We're friends now. You're on our team. Here we go. If you live in the rest of the country, there's a lot of different things you can do. But like you said, you need to be watching what's going on because this is coming for the Supreme Court. This is coming for you. But I would even say get involved in your own school boards and your own school districts, your own local communities, your local libraries, find out what's going on. But we do actually appreciate the moral support as well. Even like hey, we love you from up here, rather than, hey, we're giving up on Texas. We hope you cut yourselves off, because there are some of us down here fighting. We will always take financial donations on our website, obviously. But yeah, if there's something even that someone thinks they may have to offer, DM us, please. Even something as practical as maybe graphic design, or maybe you're really good with numbers and we are all volunteer. We're a nonprofit. All 3 of us, between me, Anne, and Frank, we all have other jobs. This isn't our job, although we spend as much time as it is our job. So we'll take any support and help we can get, honestly.
Yeah. And you have a sign-on letter that's available right now. Is that open to everyone or just organizations?
It's open to individuals as well. If you're not from Texas, just let us know where you live, because we are, going to separate it by Texans and not Texans, but we would love the support from around the country. We have a letter. It will be all over our socials and our website. And we're just looking for, in Texas specifically, we have a goal to get 10,000 Texans to sign on. We would like to show the state legislature that Texas actually doesn't want to ban books. Even though their special interests are trying to get them to, and they keep claiming that this is the will of the people, it's not. And we need people to actually say that and to care. And we know, and so this is just a small part of that. It's really simple. It's a first step. You just sign on to the letter. And like I said, you can find it on Texas Freedom to Read's website. You can Google it. We have an Instagram, a Blue Sky, right? A Facebook page. Especially Texans, we'd love your signatures. And then share with all your friends.
Laney Hawes of the Texas Freedom to Read Project, thank you so much for everything you do to defend the right to read, not just in Texas, but as we've said, around the country.
Because what happens here, especially with this new administration, is on its way. We saw our lieutenant governor released his legislative priorities today. And in Texas, when the lieutenant governor releases his legislative priorities, that's a big deal, because that's kind of means that is the direction the legislature is going to take. It's not just like a whatever wish list. And it's just a list of things copied and pasted ultimately from our current presidential administration. But a lot of it has to do with parental bill of rights in public education, guarding against inappropriate books in public schools. Notice it doesn't talk about like all schools or all children. They're going to let private schools do whatever they want, right? That's another thing, is whatever. This is about control. Another one is our favorite, like all of the important things in the world today. Okay, this is it. Here we go. 25 top things that Texans are most needing to focus on this year. One of them is drag time story hour. I mean, we have people who can't pay their bills, or we have inflation, which is actually on its way down, but that's what they claim is the problem, right? And the most important 25 things in Texas right now, and the most important, and let's see, drag time story hour is number 18. maybe there's what, like 10 a year? Anyway.
And no one is being dragged
No.
in chains to the drag time story hour. Like it doesn't happen.
Interestingly enough, I've never even been to one. Like that's how rare they are. And I go to all sorts of events, but you know what I mean? It's like, this is not a thing. And you could just stay home. Anyway. So.
I wish they would. One of these days, they'll just stay home.
I wish they would.
All right, Laney.
Anyway.
Well, let's sign up with that hope.
Yeah. They'll just stay
They'll just start staying home.
Yes. Oh, good.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to Book to the Bookstore Education Podcast, brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!